I attended a party with my girlfriend knowing she was with another man, so I publicly exposed everything and left everyone speechless. Hey, Reddit. My name is Ethan, and I'm 29 years old. I work as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized company, and up until recently, I was living what most people would consider the dream life. I had a good job that paid well, a nice house that I was proud to call home, and I was married to Jessica for 3 years. We had built what seemed like a perfect life together. Miami became our home about 2 years ago when we decided to make the move from our previous city. I've never once regretted that decision. The eternal sunshine and beautiful beaches everywhere you look made it feel like paradise. It was absolutely perfect for our lifestyle, or at least what I thought was our shared lifestyle at the time. This particular evening was supposed to be nothing more than a quick 10-minute stop. I was still wearing my dress shirt and tie from another long day at the office, and I could smell the lingering scent of coffee and stress that seemed to follow me everywhere lately. I had some important paperwork sitting in my briefcase that needed attention, and there was still a half-eaten sandwich sitting in my car's cup holder from lunch that I never got around to finishing. Earlier that day, Jessica had sent me a text message saying she was going out with the girls again. It seemed like these girls' nights were becoming more and more frequent lately, but I tried not to think too much about it. I decided to do something that was borderline thoughtful for once. Her laptop charger was sitting on our dresser at home, and I knew she'd need it tomorrow for her remote work. It was a simple gesture, really, nothing with any real agenda behind it. I just wanted to see her smile without having to beg for one, which had become increasingly difficult in recent months. I pulled into Madison Street around 9 o'clock in the evening. Her place was completely lit up like some kind of college fraternity party, which immediately struck me as odd. There were way too many cars parked outside for what was supposed to be a casual girls' night, and there was way too much noise spilling out from inside the house. Despite the strange feeling growing in my stomach, I still decided to park my car and get out. I grabbed the charger from my passenger seat along with a bottle of red wine that I'd been saving for a special occasion. As I walked up to the front door, I noticed that the porch light was flickering like a broken neon sign, casting eerie shadows across the walkway. When I reached the door, I realized it wasn't closed all the way. I could hear music and voices drifting out from inside the house. I stepped inside without bothering to knock, assuming that with all the noise and commotion, no one would hear me anyway. The place immediately hit me with this strange smell, something stale and sour that had been disguised poorly with cheap vanilla perfume. The combination was almost nauseating. I could hear laughter and animated conversation echoing down the hallway, drawing me further into the house. The second I stepped through that doorframe, I felt this weird, off-balance sensation wash over me. It was like that feeling you get when the air pressure drops dramatically right before a major storm hits. It wasn't wrong in the sense of physical danger. There was nothing threatening about the environment itself, but something felt wrong in a much deeper way, like betrayal was literally hanging in the atmosphere around me. The hallway opened up into the main living room, and what I saw there will be burned into my memory forever. There were maybe 15 or 16 people scattered around the space, all engaged in various conversations under dim lighting that cast long shadows everywhere. The atmosphere felt more like a nightclub than someone's living room. Cheap vodka and whiskey bottles were lined up on the counter like some kind of amateur bar setup, and the music was playing just loud enough to muffle any private conversations that might be happening. About half the faces in the room were complete strangers to me, which immediately raised red flags since this was supposed to be Jessica's close-knit group of girlfriends having a casual wine night. But what really stopped me dead in my tracks was what I saw in the center of the main couch. Right there, in plain view of everyone at this so-called girls' night, sat my wife, Jessica. She was leaned in towards some guy who had this incredibly cocky expression plastered across his face. He was wearing expensive-looking sneakers and designer jeans that probably cost more than most people's rent. Jessica's legs were crossed toward him like magnets, drawn in his direction, and one of her hands was resting on his shoulder, like it belonged there naturally. When she laughed at something he said, her head tilted back in this soft, fake little giggle that I hadn't heard her make in months, certainly not when she was talking to me. His hand was casually playing with her hair, twirling strands between his fingers like they were intimate. Her lipstick was darker and more dramatic than anything she usually wore around the house, and the neckline of her black dress was cut way deeper than what I'd consider appropriate for a girls' night out. The amount of skin she was showing had definitely not been picked out with her female friends in mind. At first, she didn't notice me standing there in the doorway. She was completely absorbed in whatever conversation she was having with this stranger. Some woman to my left glanced in my direction, paused mid-sip of her drink, and just stared at me with wide eyes. I saw her whisper something urgent to her friend, and suddenly the energy in the room began to shift as more people became aware of my presence. That's when Jessica suddenly turned around, probably alerted by the change in atmosphere. Our eyes locked across the room, and in that split second, I watched every possible excuse flash behind her pupils like a slideshow. I could see the shock register first, followed immediately by panic, then this quick mental calculation as she tried to figure out how to handle the situation. But what I didn't see, not even once, was guilt. Instead, there was just this flicker of pure annoyance that I had shown up uninvited and interrupted whatever was happening. I took 2 deliberate steps into the room, feeling every pair of eyes in the place focused on me. I held up the laptop charger like it was evidence of a crime, making sure my voice was loud enough to silence all the background noise and conversation. "This what you meant by wine night, Jess?" I asked, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. The guy sitting beside her immediately tensed up, his cocky demeanor faltering for just a moment. Jessica stood up slowly from the couch, smoothing down her dress like appearances still mattered at this point. And then she had the absolute audacity to say something that would change everything between us forever. Not "I'm sorry," not any kind of explanation or attempt to justify what I was seeing. Instead, she looked me dead in the eye and asked, "Why are you here?" That question, delivered in that particular tone, was the exact moment everything changed for me. It wasn't the scene I'd walked in on with her draped over some stranger. It wasn't his hand that had been casually resting on her thigh. It wasn't even the perfume she was wearing that I definitely hadn't bought for her. It was that question, delivered with the kind of tone that suggested I was the one intruding on something sacred, like I was the problem in this entire equation. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in what felt like months, and suddenly everything became crystal clear. I realized she wasn't even afraid of being caught in this situation. She wasn't panicked about having to explain herself or worried about the consequences of her actions. She was just genuinely pissed off that she'd been interrupted before she could properly cover her tracks or finish whatever she had planned for the evening. Everyone in the room was staring at us now, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. I could see Madison whispering something urgent to the girl beside her, probably trying to figure out how to defuse the situation. The guy Jessica had been with shifted closer to her on the couch, moving in like he was some kind of moral support, like he was her backup plan in human form and ready to defend her if necessary. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the wine bottle across the room or start swinging like some unhinged psycho having a complete meltdown. I didn't say a single word for what felt like 10 long, agonizing seconds while everyone waited to see how this was going to play out. When I finally did speak, I made sure to do it very carefully and deliberately, keeping my voice steady and controlled. "You left your wedding ring on the kitchen counter this morning," I said, letting each word hang in the air. "I thought you just forgot it when you rushed out the door for work. Now I understand exactly why you left it behind." For just a moment, Jessica's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. But it wasn't with shame or embarrassment like you might expect from someone who'd just been caught in such a compromising position. Instead, something much crueler flashed in her eyes, something cold and calculating. She actually rolled her eyes at me like I was being completely dramatic about the whole situation. "Don't make this into some big theatrical scene, Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. And that's when something inside me stopped trying to be understanding or give her the benefit of the doubt. She said it like I had embarrassed her in front of her friends by showing up unannounced, like I had brought shame into that room simply by existing and witnessing what was happening. Not her, for being draped across some random guy while wearing her wedding dress from 3 years ago. Like she'd completely forgotten what our wedding vows actually sounded like when we promised to be faithful to each other. That smug, dismissive tone in her voice when she said, "Don't make this dramatic, Ethan," still rings in my ears like a car alarm going off at 3 in the morning. The kind of sound you can't shut off no matter how hard you try, no matter how many times you want to punch something just to make it stop. I should have just walked out right then and there, should have taken what little dignity I had left and removed myself from that toxic situation. But I didn't do the smart thing. Instead, I found myself looking straight at the guy she'd been cuddling with, studying him like I was trying to memorize every detail of the person my wife had chosen over me. He didn't even flinch when I stared him down, didn't show any signs of discomfort or guilt about the situation. He was too confident, too sure that he was completely safe in this environment. He felt protected in the middle of her carefully constructed web of lies and manipulation. He was average height, but clearly spent a lot of time at the gym, with that artificially sculpted look that screamed, "Look at me, I'm worth your attention." There was a fake Rolex glinting on his wrist, and he was wearing a tight button-down shirt with just enough buttons undone to show off his chest. He gave me this subtle smirk, not wide or obviously cocky, but just enough attitude to communicate one very clear message. She already told me you wouldn't show up here tonight. So I decided to ask him a question, keeping my voice as controlled and quiet as possible. "You know she's married to me?" I said, gesturing slightly toward Jessica. He blinked once but didn't give me any kind of answer. Didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken to him. That's when Jessica actually snorted like I had just told the world's worst joke. Like the very idea of our marriage was something amusing to her. "Oh my God, Ethan, it's really not like that," she said, waving her hand dismissively. I glanced down at the hand she had just pulled off his chest, and it looked pretty damn clear to me what was happening between them. The body language, the intimate positioning, the way she was defending him instead of addressing my concerns. Everything about the situation screamed that this was far from innocent. Jessica crossed her arms defensively and tilted her head like a judge about to dismiss a frivolous case. "You're acting absolutely crazy right now," she said with that same condescending tone. "Tyler's just a friend from work, and we're all just hanging out having drinks together. That's literally all this is." From where I was standing, it definitely didn't look like innocent hanging out with coworkers. I could hear my voice starting to slip from that carefully controlled composure I'd been maintaining. The calm facade was beginning to splinter as the reality of what I was witnessing sank in deeper. She took a step forward, moving close enough for me to see the glitter on her collarbone, catching the dim light from the overhead fixtures. I could practically see the lie already forming behind her teeth before she even opened her mouth to speak. "If you're going to make a scene about nothing," she said, "at least do it outside where you won't embarrass everyone who's just trying to have a good time." "You mean out of sight?" I asked her directly, my voice gaining an edge. "Like everything else you've been hiding from me lately?" That comment hit its target with precision. Her jaw immediately locked up tight, and I could feel the temperature in the room drop noticeably as the tension ratcheted up another level. Madison tried to cut into our conversation, probably sensing that things were about to escalate beyond her comfort level. "Maybe you guys should just," she started to say. "Shut up, Madison!" I snapped without even turning around to look at her. My eyes never left Jessica's face, and she knew exactly what I was talking about when I mentioned her hiding things. She knew I was right about the pattern of secrecy and deception. Jessica's guilty silence in that moment said more than any apology ever could have. She looked away from my stare, unable to maintain eye contact when confronted with the truth. Several other people in the room also looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the mounting tension that was becoming too thick to ignore. But then Jessica's whole posture changed in an instant. Her chin went higher, her chest came out, like she was suddenly transforming herself into the victim in this entire situation. Like she was the one being wronged instead of the one who had orchestrated this whole deceptive scenario. "I didn't cheat on you, Ethan," she declared, as if stating it with enough conviction would make it true. "Didn't cheat," I echoed back, shaking my head in complete disbelief. "You're practically playing Twister on a couch with a guy whose full name I don't even know, at a party where you told me you'd be having wine with the girls." She actually started laughing at that point, but it was a dry, mocking sound with absolutely zero humor in it. The kind of laugh that's designed to make the other person feel stupid for even bringing up their concerns. "We didn't do anything physical together," she said, emphasizing each word like I was too dense to understand basic concepts. "If that's what you're about to scream about in your pathetic little jealous meltdown, then you've already done enough damage for one night." I stared at her for a long beat, trying to process the fact that she was not only refusing to acknowledge the inappropriateness of her behavior, but was actually trying to turn this around and make me the villain. And this next part, I will never forget as long as I live, because it was the moment that truly ended our marriage in my mind. She turned back to Tyler, the guy she'd been all over when I walked in. She put her hand right back on his shoulder, looked him directly in the eyes with this intimate familiarity, and said, "You see what I have to deal with at home?" Something inside me finally gave out completely when I heard those words. It wasn't anger. It wasn't heartbreak in the traditional sense. It was just that quiet, icy click you feel when something breaks so deep inside you that you know you can never fix it again. It was the sound of a door slamming shut permanently. I nodded once, turned around, and walked straight out of that house. No yelling, no dramatic door slamming, no theatrical gestures. But something fundamental between us ended that night, and I don't think she even noticed it happening. The drive home didn't feel real at all. I honestly don't even remember starting the engine or putting the car in drive. The keys must have turned themselves somehow, because I was operating on complete autopilot. My hands were shaking, but not violently like you might expect after such a confrontation. It was just that slow, dull tremor you get when your body is finally catching up to a shock that your mind already understands completely. She had looked me dead in the eye and played the victim card right in front of Tyler, right in front of everyone at that party. She didn't even try to cover it up or make weak excuses about misunderstandings. There was no panic, no stammering, no embarrassment about being caught in such a compromising position. Just lies dressed up in casual, dismissive tones, delivered like I was overreacting to something completely innocent. Like her sitting in some guy's lap while telling me she was having a girls' night was somehow a misunderstanding that I should apologize for. And honestly, the worst part of this whole thing is that I almost did exactly that. There was a moment during that dark stretch of road past Cedar Lake where I actually started questioning myself, wondering if maybe I had misread the entire situation. If maybe it really wasn't as bad as it looked from my perspective. If maybe I was being the jealous, paranoid husband who couldn't trust his wife to have male friends. That's how deep she had worked her manipulation into my psyche over the months leading up to this. She had conditioned me to have that instinct to defend her actions and question my own perceptions, even when I had literally witnessed her with her nails sunk into someone else's shoulder, whispering intimately in his ear like I didn't exist. I pulled into our driveway and just sat there for several minutes, listening to the engine ticking as it cooled down in the night air. The porch light was off like always. Jessica never remembered to turn it on when she left the house. The whole place looked exactly like it did every other night when I came home from work. Perfect on the outside, quiet, clean, and well-maintained. A magazine picture of what domestic happiness is supposed to look like. But as I sat there in my car, I could already feel the rot spreading through everything we had built together. It was like something had died in the walls of our home, and now the decay was going to work its way through every room, every memory, every shared moment we'd ever had. I walked through the front door and was immediately hit by the scent of citrus cleaner mixed with something that now felt like lies. The laundry that Jessica never bothered to fold was still sitting in the basket exactly where she had left it that morning. Her earrings were scattered across the kitchen counter in that careless way she always left her jewelry. And there, right next to the sink like it was nothing more than a piece of costume jewelry, was her wedding ring, the one I had mentioned at the party. I picked up the ring and stared at it for a long time. There were no scratches on it, no dents from years of wear and the normal activities of daily life. Just a cold, polished circle of white gold that apparently meant absolutely nothing to the woman who was supposed to wear it as a symbol of our commitment to each other. I knew right then that I definitely wasn't going to be sleeping that night. Instead, I sat down on the couch in complete darkness and started scrolling through our text message history on my phone. I read through so many love you too messages, so many check-ins about her day, so many plans we had made for our future together. For the first time, I started reading between the lines, looking for clues I had missed. All those nights she came home late from work with elaborate explanations about project deadlines. All those weekends she swore she needed me time and disappeared for hours without really explaining where she was going. All those smiles that never quite reached her eyes when we talked about buying a house together or discussed the possibility of having kids someday. And then I did something I had never planned on doing. Something I never thought I would stoop to in a million years. I opened her iPad that was sitting on the coffee table, the one she always left lying around because she trusted me completely. It was synced to her phone automatically, and I didn't even have to guess her password because it was still set to my birthday, March 15th. And there it was. Everything I needed to see laid out in front of me like evidence in a criminal case. There were text messages, dozens and dozens of them, and not just with Tyler from tonight. There were flirty conversations with someone named Kevin, long strings of heart emojis with a guy listed in her contacts as Steve W., and a voice note she had sent just 3 nights ago, whispering something about how he never touches me like you do. I felt physically sick reading through this digital archive of betrayal. There were screenshots saved in her photo album, pictures that weren't graphic but were close enough that the intention was impossible to deny. Photos of her in the bathroom mirror, biting her lip seductively. Pictures of her in that red dress she had told me she hated. The same one she wore the night she said she had to work late at the office. All of it was stored neatly under her iCloud account, like it was some kind of digital scrapbook of infidelity. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the iPad across the room in a fit of rage or scream at the walls until my voice gave out. I didn't punch anything or have some kind of dramatic breakdown like you see in movies. I just sat there in that living room, completely numb, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart in real time instead of my own. Somewhere between 3:17 and 4:08 a.m., as I sat there staring at the evidence of her systematic betrayal, I knew with absolute certainty that I would never look at her the same way again. The woman I had married, the person I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world, simply didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never had existed in the first place, and I had just been in love with an illusion she had carefully constructed. At 8:47 a.m., I heard her car pulling up the driveway. I hadn't moved from the couch in hours, hadn't even tried to sleep or find a more comfortable position. I had been sitting there staring at nothing, letting the silence crawl over me like a wet, suffocating blanket while I processed everything I had discovered. I knew the sound of her tires on our gravel driveway by heart. I knew the soft electronic chime when her car door opened. And I definitely knew the way Jessica always walked when she was wearing heels. She had this particular clicking stride that was just fast enough to communicate that she had somewhere better to be, somewhere more important than wherever she currently was. The front door creaked open slowly, and she hesitated in the doorframe like she didn't know whether to come inside or turn around and run. I watched her silhouette shift against the morning light streaming in behind her. Then she stepped inside carefully, moving like the house wasn't really hers anymore, like she was trespassing on someone else's property and wasn't sure if she was welcome. Her voice came out soft and cautious when she finally spoke. "Ethan?" I didn't answer her. I didn't even acknowledge that she was there. She walked a few more steps into the house, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. And then she saw me hunched over on the couch with my elbows on my knees, her wedding ring still clutched in my fist. "Ethan," she said again. But this time there was more annoyance in her tone, like I was making things unnecessarily difficult for her by not responding immediately. I still didn't say a single word to her. She dropped her purse on the entryway table with way too much force, and the sound echoed through the quiet house like a gunshot. "Are we really doing this right now? Seriously?" she asked, her voice dripping with exasperation. I finally turned to face her after what felt like an eternity of ignoring her presence. When I spoke, my voice came out lower and more controlled than I had expected it to be. "You lied to my face last night?" She blinked once, then smoothed down her wrinkled dress, the same black dress she had been wearing when I found her draped across Tyler. Her makeup was smudged, her lipstick was half gone, and her hair looked like she had been running her fingers through it all night. But she didn't look tired or remorseful. She just looked annoyed that I was still upset about what had happened. "Can we please not turn this into a soap opera?" she said with a sigh. "You walked in on me having drinks with friends, and you completely freaked out for no reason whatsoever. You were wrapped around Tyler like you had forgotten we were married," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I walked in and you froze like you had been caught doing something you knew was wrong. That wasn't nothing, Jessica." She sighed again, like I was boring her to death with my concerns. "You're blowing this completely out of proportion." I stood up from the couch and held out her iPad toward her. "Then explain this to me." Her eyes immediately darted down to the screen, but she didn't reach for the device or try to grab it away from me. She just stared at it like it was a live grenade. "I didn't mean to go through your private stuff," I continued, "but you left it open on the coffee table, and what I saw there." I paused, shaking my head. "Jesus Christ, Jessica!" She crossed her arms defensively and made herself look smaller and more vulnerable, like she was trying to transform into the victim in this situation. "You shouldn't have looked through my personal messages," she said quietly. "That's a violation of my privacy." "That's what you're focusing on right now?" I asked incredulously. "The fact that I invaded your privacy? Not the fact that you've been having emotional affairs with multiple men?" Instead of answering me directly, she turned toward the hallway like she was planning to escape into the bedroom. "I'm not doing this at 6 in the morning," she muttered. I followed her as she tried to walk away from the conversation. "No, you don't get to just disappear into the bedroom like this is just another normal Tuesday morning," I said firmly. "You don't get to sleep off your affair while I sit here wondering if any of our relationship was ever real." She spun around on me in the hallway, her face flushed with what looked like righteous indignation. "It wasn't an affair, Ethan," she said with conviction. "I didn't sleep with Tyler or anyone else, okay? We were just talking and texting. I needed someone to talk to about my feelings because you're always working late or checking out mentally. You don't even see me anymore as a person." And there it was. Her trump card. The explanation she had been preparing to justify everything. According to Jessica, I was somehow to blame for her betrayal because I worked hard to provide for our life together. Because I had trusted her completely, instead of monitoring her every move like some kind of paranoid control freak. Because I didn't immediately recognize that she was unhappy and address her every emotional need before she felt compelled to seek attention elsewhere. I stared at her, absolutely stunned by the sheer audacity of what she was trying to pull. So instead of talking to me, your actual husband, I said slowly, you decided to play footsie with gym rats at parties and send voice notes about how I don't touch you right? You flirted like some desperate teenager with multiple men behind my back. You sent pictures of yourself to other guys. You let some random stranger put his hand between your legs at a party, and then you have the gall to say that I'm the one who checked out? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again without saying anything. When she finally did speak, it was in this pathetic victim voice that was clearly designed to manipulate my emotions. You don't know how lonely it's been for me, she whispered. And there it was, exactly what she wanted me to hear. Her loneliness, her unmet emotional needs, her suffering in our marriage. Like any of that somehow justified everything she had done. Like her feelings of neglect made it perfectly acceptable to betray our wedding vows and build secret relationships with other men. I took a deep breath, realizing that I wasn't yelling anymore. I was actually done yelling at this point, done trying to make her understand the magnitude of what she had destroyed. You could have told me you were unhappy, I said calmly. You could have begged me to go to couples therapy. You could have screamed at me about feeling neglected. But instead, you chose to betray me behind my back. She turned away from me like she couldn't handle hearing the truth spoken so directly. I pulled her wedding ring out of my pocket and dropped it on the hallway table between us. It made this loud, metallic sound as it hit the wooden surface. I'm not your excuse anymore, Jessica, I said with finality. The sound of her wedding ring hitting that wooden table echoed louder than anything either of us had said during the entire confrontation. It spun once, then twice, then went completely still. She didn't even glance down at it as it settled. She just walked right past it, walked right past me, and disappeared into the bedroom like I hadn't just shattered the foundation of our entire marriage with that one sentence. Like she was retreating into some familiar cave where accountability couldn't reach her. I stood in that hallway way longer than I should have, staring at the closed bedroom door and listening for something, anything that might indicate remorse or recognition of what had just happened. But there was no crying, no scrambling to fix what she had broken, no desperate apology, no sign that she even cared about the destruction she had caused. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, even though my stomach had absolutely no interest in swallowing anything at that moment. My hands were cold, my knuckles were stiff, and my whole body felt like it didn't belong in this house anymore. It felt like it had been ejected from something it had helped build, something it no longer had any claim to. Half an hour passed, maybe more. I wasn't really keeping track of time anymore. Finally, I got the courage to crack the bedroom door open and see what she was doing. She was lying on our bed, casually scrolling through her phone like nothing significant had just happened between us. She looked calm, comfortable, not even pretending to be upset about our marriage falling apart. Jessica, I said quietly. She didn't bother looking up from her screen. What do you want now? Do you even care that our marriage is falling apart right in front of us? I asked. That finally got her attention. She sat up slightly, propped on one elbow, but kept her phone clutched in her hand like it was a lifeline to something more important than our conversation. Of course I care about us, she said dismissively. But I'm not going to stand here and let you corner me like some kind of criminal when I haven't even gotten any sleep. You're not tired, I told her flatly. You're just done pretending to give a shit about what happens to us. She tilted her head and looked at me, and for just a second, something flickered in her eyes. It wasn't annoyance or regret or even anger. It was pity. She actually pitied me, like I was the sad, delusional fool in this story who hadn't seen any of the obvious signs that were right in front of my face. I walked further into our bedroom, feeling like I was entering enemy territory. I read all the messages with Tyler, I said, my voice steady and controlled. With Kevin, with that guy named Steve that you saved under a fake name in your contacts. This wasn't one mistake, Jessica. This is a clear pattern of lying and cheating that's been going on for months. She looked away from me toward the window, avoiding eye contact completely. None of them actually mattered to me, she said with complete indifference. That might have been the cruelest thing she could have possibly said in that moment. If they didn't matter to her, then what did that make our marriage? What did that make me? Then what did matter? I asked her directly. Because I gave you everything I had. I gave you space when you said you needed it. I gave you love when you were being distant and cold. I gave you time to figure yourself out every single time you went through one of your moods and shut me out completely. And you gave me this betrayal in return. Her voice went completely flat and emotionless when she responded. I didn't ask you to do any of that. My breath caught in my throat. That sentence, just 6 simple words, stabbed deeper than anything else she had said during this entire nightmare. I didn't ask you to. Not, I'm sorry for hurting you. Not, I got lost and made some terrible mistakes. Not even, it wasn't supposed to happen this way. Just that cold, brutal dismissal of everything I had given her, like my love and commitment had been some unwelcome burden she had tolerated until something more exciting came along. She sat up fully now, brushing her hair out of her face like she was gearing up for some kind of business presentation. Ethan, people grow apart sometimes, she said matter-of-factly. That's just real life. What do you want me to do? Lie and say I'm still in love with you when I'm not? Complete silence filled the room. I stared at her like I had been waiting my entire marriage for this mask to finally fall off, and now it had. You're not in love with me? I asked quietly. But you stayed married to me. You took vacations with me. You wore the wedding ring when it was convenient for appearances. You let me think everything was fine between us while you were building relationships with other men behind my back. She actually shrugged like it was no big deal, like she was discussing the weather. It was easier that way. That was it. Easier. Our entire marriage, all the plans we had made, all the dreams we had shared, all the promises we had exchanged, it had all been maintained because it was simply easier for her than dealing with the messy reality of ending things properly. I backed out of the room like I had stumbled into someone else's house, someone else's nightmare. The woman I had married was completely gone, and what she had left behind didn't even have the decency to flinch when delivering that final blow. I don't remember trying to sleep that night. I must have passed out on the couch sometime after sunrise because I woke up with harsh sunlight glaring through the blinds and this awful stench of cold coffee filling my nostrils. My neck was locked in the worst possible position, and there was this thin metallic taste in my mouth, regret maybe, or fury that had dried overnight like old blood. I sat up slowly, and everything in my body resisted movement like it knew what this day was going to hold. Jessica was already gone from the house. Her side of the bed was cold when I checked, and the bathroom mirror had been cleared of all her personal products. There was no note, no text message, nothing to indicate where she had gone or when she might be back. Just the faintest scent of her perfume, lingering in the hallway like she wanted me to know that she had left on her own terms, like this was some chess game and she had just made the next strategic move. I didn't chase after her. I didn't send desperate text messages begging for explanations or second chances. Instead, I started opening drawers methodically throughout the house. It wasn't rage driving me at this point. It was something completely clinical and detached. I went from closet to dresser to linen cabinet, quietly collecting everything that belonged to her. I gathered up her makeup bags, her hair straightener, her ridiculous collection of scented bath bombs that she never actually used. I threw it all in cardboard boxes, labeling each one clearly with a black marker. 3 boxes total when I was finished with the bathroom and miscellaneous items. Her clothes filled up 2 more boxes. The third one contained everything else, including that framed wedding photo she had always kept on her nightstand, but hadn't touched or looked at in months. I placed her wedding ring right on top of everything else, right in the center where she couldn't possibly miss it when she opened the box. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened her iPad one more time. There were already new messages waiting for her, fresh evidence of the life she was living parallel to our marriage. Tyler had written, "Last night was wild, you okay, babe?" Kevin had sent, "Tell me when he leaves so I can come over." There was another message from a number she hadn't bothered to save in her contacts that simply read, "He doesn't know about us, right? Don't want any drama." I sat there reading these messages from men I had never met, but now knew in the worst possible way. They all sounded exactly the same. Casual, arrogant, completely sure that I was just the fool stumbling around in the dark while they got to be her private escape, her secret backup plans for when her real life got boring. And still, even after everything I had discovered, even after that brutal conversation in the bedroom, she hadn't admitted to doing anything wrong. There had been no real confession, no genuine apology, no acknowledgement of the damage she had caused. Just indifference wrapped up in fake justifications and victim playing. So I did the one thing I never thought I would do in this situation. I called my older brother Ryan. We hadn't been particularly close lately, which was mostly due to the usual combination of life getting in the way, physical distance, and those stupid disagreements over trivial things that tend to build up between family members over time. But I needed someone real right now, someone who wouldn't sugarcoat the truth or try to play amateur therapist with my emotions. Ryan had always been brutally honest, sometimes to a fault. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the concern in his voice immediately. Ethan? I didn't even bother with the usual pleasantries or hello. I just cut straight to the heart of it. I think my marriage is completely over. There was this long pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear him processing what I had just said. Then his voice came through steady and serious. Tell me everything that happened. So I did exactly that. I laid it all out from start to finish. From the couch scene at Madison's party, to the text messages I had found on her iPad to her cold, vacant reaction during our conversation that morning. I didn't leave anything out, didn't sugarcoat any of the details, didn't try to make myself look better or make her seem worse than she actually was. He didn't interrupt me once during the entire story, just let me get it all out. When I finally finished talking, there was another moment of silence before he said very quietly, "You know what you have to do, right?" "I think so," I told him honestly. "Don't think about it, Ethan. You know," he said with conviction, "you just don't want to admit it yet because it's scary as hell." I stared down at her wedding ring sitting in the box with all her other belongings. "She told me that staying with me was just easier for her," I said, still trying to process the cruelty of that admission. What kind of person says something like that to someone they supposedly loved? I heard him exhale slowly on the other end. "Then make it hard for her," he said simply. "Make her face what she's actually done instead of letting her hide behind excuses and manipulation." And in that exact moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. I stopped waiting for an apology that was never going to come. I stopped hoping that she would suddenly realize what she had lost and come crawling back with genuine remorse. Instead, I started planning my actual exit strategy. That afternoon, I made a list. It wasn't dramatic or emotional, and there was no fire or slashing up of photographs involved. No whiskey-soaked goodbye soundtrack playing in the background. It was quiet, precise, and cold in a way I didn't know I was capable of being. Just a man with a pen in his hand, drawing lines through the bones of a life he thought he was building with someone who had never really been there. The list was straightforward. Divorce attorney, call today. Joint bank account, freeze immediately. Storage unit for her stuff, rent this week. Change the locks, get quotes tomorrow. These were all completely doable tasks, practical steps that needed to be taken. When I stared at the paper, it looked way too neat and organized, too sane for the kind of emotional madness it represented. But I wasn't going crazy here. I was thinking more clearly than I had in months, maybe years of trying to make something work that was never going to work. For the first time, I could see through the fog of making it work and trying harder. And maybe if I just love her enough, she'll come back to me. I knew exactly who she really was now, and it was definitely not the woman I had married. Or maybe it was exactly who she had always been, and I had just been too blind to see it. I called a divorce lawyer that same day. The guy's name was Phillips, and he had been referred by Ryan. His voice sounded like gravel, with zero sweetness or false comfort in his tone. He was the kind of man who had clearly seen too many good people get completely eaten alive by courtrooms and charmers and expensive heels who knew how to play the victim. He listened to the first half of my story, and then said bluntly, "She'll try to play sweet and innocent when this gets legal. Trust me on this. I've seen this exact scenario play out dozens of times. You need to start protecting yourself right now, today, before she has time to strategize." That same hour, I drove to the bank and froze our joint checking account. I made sure to leave her enough money to cover basic expenses because I wasn't trying to be cruel or vindictive. But I also wasn't going to continue bankrolling her dates with Tyler, Kevin, Steve, or whoever else was waiting in the wings. Then I just drove around for a while, not aimlessly wandering, but moving with very deliberate purpose. I went to a local storage facility and rented a climate-controlled unit under my name only, Unit 247. 20 minutes later, those 5 boxes containing all her belongings were locked safely inside, completely out of my house and out of my daily life. I sent her a text message with just the address and one simple line. "Your stuff is here. Pick it up this weekend." She didn't reply to the message, and somehow her silence was louder than any screaming match we could have had. Around 7 o'clock that evening, My phone started buzzing with a call from an unknown number. I picked it up cautiously, not sure what to expect. "Hey, it's Jessica," came her voice through the speaker. Her tone was deliberately calm and calculated, like someone who had rehearsed exactly what she was going to say before hitting the call button. "I saw what you did with the bank account, and I got your text about my things being in storage." I waited for her to say more, not giving her any kind of response to work with. "I just think it's really childish to do all this without having a real conversation first," she continued, her voice dripping with condescension. My jaw immediately tensed up. "The time for conversation was every night you said you were just tired," I replied firmly. "Every weekend, you completely vanished without explanation. Every lie you wrapped up in a smile and delivered to my face. That was our conversation, Jessica." "You're twisting everything around," she said, but I could hear the defensiveness creeping into her voice. "No," I said with absolute conviction. "You just don't like hearing the truth spoken back to you without a filter for once." She went quiet for several seconds, and when she spoke again, I could hear pure venom in her tone. "You're not as innocent as you think you are." There it was, her final defense strategy. If she couldn't stay clean in this situation, she was going to try to make me dirty too. She was going to attempt to drag me down to her level so she could justify what she had done. "I never touched another woman," I said in a low, controlled voice. "I never lied to you about where I was going or who I was with. I never flirted behind your back with anyone, never sent inappropriate messages, never built secret relationships while pretending to be committed to our marriage. But maybe that was the actual problem. Maybe being boring and loyal didn't entertain you long enough." There was a long pause, and then she actually started laughing. It wasn't sweet or amused. It was sharp and completely dismissive, designed to make me feel stupid for even defending myself. "Whatever helps you sleep at night," she said coldly, and then she hung up on me. And for the first time since this entire nightmare had started, I actually smiled a little bit. Because now I knew for certain that she wasn't confused or broken or going through some kind of temporary crisis. She was exactly who she wanted to be, and I was finally done protecting her from having to look in the mirror and face that reality. The next morning felt completely different from any I had experienced in months. I wasn't healed, not even close to that, but there was something cleaner about the air, like stepping outside into cold, fresh air after escaping from a house fire. I could still feel the burn in my lungs from all the smoke I had been breathing, but at least I wasn't actively choking on it anymore. I decided to go for a drive before sunrise, with no real destination in mind. I just wanted to feel the wind coming through the car window and have some time away from walls that held too many fake memories. The house was still technically half hers according to the law, but emotionally, she had burned her name off everything the night she looked me in the eye and said that staying with me was just easier than dealing with the alternative. When I got back around 9 in the morning, her car was sitting in our driveway. She hadn't bothered to text or call first to let me know she was coming by. She had just showed up without any warning, with no courtesy or respect for the fact that I might not want to see her. There was a part of me that was actually hoping she was there to fight, not because I wanted the drama, but because that would at least confirm what I already suspected, that she was completely incapable of genuine remorse. I stepped into the house and there she was, standing in our living room with one hand on her hip like she owned the place. She was wearing sunglasses, even though she was inside, like this was her personal stage and she had just finished rehearsing her performance. "You froze our bank account," she said, like she had just discovered that water is wet. "I told you I was going to do that," I replied calmly. "I had a hair appointment today, Ethan," she said with genuine indignation. "You know how hard it is to reschedule with Carrie on short notice?" That was her opening line after everything that had happened between us. Her hair appointment was the priority she was most concerned about. I actually laughed out loud. I couldn't help it. A dry, bitter chuckle slipped out before I could stop myself. She frowned at me like I was completely insane. "You think this is funny?" "No," I said, still processing the absurdity of the moment. "But it's absolutely unbelievable. You walked in here after emotionally nuking our marriage, and your main complaint is that your hairstylist might be slightly inconvenienced by your financial situation." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "This is exactly why I stopped talking to you about anything important," she said. "Everything always turns into a huge argument." "No, Jessica, everything is finally just the truth," I replied. "You don't get to cheat and lie and manipulate people and then cry foul when consequences show up at your doorstep." She took off her sunglasses very slowly, like she was bracing herself for a physical confrontation. "I didn't cheat on you," I stepped forward and looked her directly in the eyes. Yes, you absolutely did, I said with conviction. Maybe not physically, though honestly I'm still not convinced about that either. But emotionally, repeatedly, and deliberately. You had backup boyfriends on speed dial while I was fighting for our marriage completely alone. Her voice cracked, but not from sadness or remorse. It cracked from pure irritation and annoyance at having to deal with my unreasonable reaction to her betrayal. God, you're so fucking dramatic about everything. There it was again, that word. Dramatic. Her favorite weapon to use against me whenever I dared to have feelings about her behavior. I gestured toward the empty hallway where her belongings used to be. Your stuff is gone. It's in storage where I told you it would be, I said. I'm done with this, Jessica. She blinked once, like she was genuinely confused by my response. Just like that? No, I told her firmly. Not just like that. Like this. After months of pretending you were still emotionally present in this marriage. After countless nights of cold shoulders and weak excuses. After discovering that I was apparently just a placeholder until you found someone who made you feel special for 5 fucking minutes. There was a long silence between us as she processed what I had just said. Then she walked past me toward the front door, deliberately brushing against my shoulder like I didn't exist, like I was just an obstacle in her path. Before she opened the door to leave, she turned around and looked at me with complete confidence. You're going to regret this decision, she said with absolute certainty. Not right now, maybe not for a few months, but you will eventually. No one else will put up with your bullshit the way I did. I looked her dead in the eye one final time. I really hope not, I said quietly. She slammed the door behind her with enough force to rattle the windows, but for the first time in this whole mess, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like closure. The door didn't just close behind her, it sealed something permanently. I stood in that silence for a long while, and while it wasn't peaceful yet, it was completely honest for the first time in months. The storm had finally moved through our house, leaving behind clarity instead of destruction. There would be no more lies to untangle every night. No more late-night fake apologies that meant nothing. No more second-guessing myself while she texted her gym buddy from 3 rooms away. I spent that entire day doing what felt like reclaiming my own space. I cleaned the house, not out of spite or anger, but out of pure necessity. Her perfume was still embedded in the throw pillows on the couch. The bathroom mirror still had her fingerprints smudged across its surface. So I scrubbed and washed every single surface until it felt like mine again. I took down the photo wall she had created in our hallway, the one with the cute clips and fairy lights that she used to call our journey. All those memories felt like lies now, like they were part of a story she had been telling while secretly writing a completely different one behind my back. Every single photograph felt contaminated by the knowledge of her deception. Mid-afternoon, I opened my email and found that she had sent me something new. The subject line read, "We need to talk like adults." I stared at it for a while before opening it, already knowing what kind of manipulation was waiting for me. The message was surprisingly short. I think we both said things we didn't mean yesterday. I don't want things to get messy between us legally or financially. Let's figure this out face to face, just you and me, no lawyers please. There was no apology anywhere in that message. No acknowledgement of responsibility for what had happened. Just that word, please, at the end. Which wasn't about love or fixing things. It was about control, pure and simple. She could feel it slipping away from her, and she wanted to yank it back before I made any permanent decisions. I replied with one line, "We'll talk one time, public place only." She responded within 5 minutes. "Fine, tonight at 7. We met that evening at a diner that was roughly halfway between our house and her new apartment. Yes, she had apparently already moved into an apartment, which I only found out about through a bank statement charge that had shown up online. It was typical Jessica behavior, always planning 3 steps ahead, always having her exit strategy mapped out while pretending everything was fine. She showed up looking like she was dressed for battle, wearing full armor in the form of freshly styled hair, perfectly applied makeup, and that blue blouse she had worn on our 3rd anniversary. It used to make me feel something special when she wore that particular shirt. Now it just looked like camouflage, like she was trying to disguise herself as the woman I had fallen in love with. She slid into the booth across from me, acting like she was still my loving wife coming to meet me for a pleasant dinner date. I didn't smile, didn't pretend this was going to be a comfortable conversation. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, adjusting her napkin like this was some kind of business lunch. I nodded once and said, "Say what you need to say." She leaned in closer to me, adopting what I now recognized as her manipulation posture. "Look, We were both unhappy in different ways, she began. I just handled it wrong, and I know that now. No, Jessica, I cut her off immediately. You didn't handle anything wrong. You chose to betray me repeatedly. You nurtured secret relationships behind my back and lied with your whole chest while doing it. Those weren't mistakes, they were deliberate choices. Her jaw clenched tight. She clearly wasn't expecting me to be this direct and unwilling to accept her revised version of events. So what do you want? She asked, her voice taking on an edge. You want me to beg for forgiveness? No, I said calmly. I want you to stop pretending you're the victim in this situation. She blinked rapidly, processing this response and trying to formulate a different approach. I was lonely, Ethan. You were emotionally distant for months. I didn't feel wanted or desired anymore, and you didn't talk to me about any of it. I tried to get your attention in other ways. No, I cut in again. You flirted with strangers and called it therapy for your emotional needs. Her face flushed red with anger at being contradicted so directly. You want to save face now? I continued before she could respond. Fine. Sign the papers when they come. No lawyers, no fighting over assets, no dragging this out longer than necessary. Just be done with this cleanly. She stared at me like I had just spoken in a foreign language that she couldn't understand. Then she asked the question I had been waiting for her to ask since this whole thing started. You really don't love me anymore? I looked at her with clear eyes and a steady voice. I loved you so much that I stopped loving myself, I said. That ended the night you made me feel small and insignificant in a room full of strangers so you could feel adored for 5 minutes. Her mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. She sat there in complete silence, apparently unable to formulate any response to that level of honesty. I stood up from the booth, tossed some cash on the table to cover my coffee, and said, Good luck, Jessica. Then I walked out without looking back, without turning around, without hesitating. I just kept walking toward my car and drove away from that diner, and from her, for the last time. I didn't cry after that meeting. Not in the car, not when I got home, not even when I opened the drawer where her handwritten wedding vows used to be kept. They were gone, of course, just a blank space left behind, like she had taken even the paper with her when she moved out. She couldn't risk leaving behind a single trace of who she had pretended to be during our wedding ceremony. Instead of crying, I sat on the edge of the bed, my bed now, not ours anymore, and actually breathed. Not the shallow, panicked gasps that I had been taking for weeks while trying to process her betrayal, but a full, deep breath that my lungs actually held onto. It was like they had been waiting for permission to function normally again. There's this strange relief that comes in the moment when you finally feel nothing for someone who once shaped your entire world. It's not the absence of love exactly, but the absence of hope for something that was never going to happen. The absence of the exhausting effort it takes to keep believing in someone who stopped believing in you months ago. I didn't even tell anyone about the diner meeting until 2 days later when Ryan came over to help me move some furniture around. Not because I necessarily needed the help, but because he understood that I needed the company. Brothers have an instinct for that kind of thing. They know when you need someone around without having to ask for it directly. We spent the afternoon shoving the old couch out to the curb, the one she used to stretch across like she was posing for a magazine cover. The next morning, I bought a new one that was firmer, smaller, and a darker gray color. It was actually mine for the first time, chosen based on what I wanted instead of what would complement her aesthetic vision for our home. While we were working on rearranging the living room, Ryan asked casually, "So you talked to her again after everything?" I nodded and kept lifting. Yeah, and she wanted to spin the whole thing like we were just two people who had naturally drifted apart over time. Ryan let out a bitter laugh. Of course she did. That's always the story with people like her. I shut it down completely, I continued. Told her it was over, told her she doesn't get to rewrite the ending to make herself feel better about what she did. He clapped my shoulder firmly. Good for you, man. Then he looked me dead in the eye and said, You know what scares them the most? When you stop yelling and start moving on. When you go completely quiet and just disappear from their drama. He was absolutely right about that. Because that's exactly when Jessica started texting me again. Not long paragraphs full of explanations or I'm sorry messages that might have indicated genuine remorse. Instead, she sent these vague breadcrumb texts that were designed to keep the door cracked open just enough for her to slip back through if she decided she wanted to. Just checking on you. Hope you're doing okay. Saw something today that reminded me of you. These were the kind of messages that invite conversation without offering any real closure or resolution. It was classic manipulation bait, designed to test whether I was still emotionally available to be drawn back into her web. I didn't respond to any of them. Every time I saw her name pop up on my phone screen, I forced myself to picture her face that night on the couch with Tyler. The way she had looked through me, like I was interrupting something private and important. The way she had turned to him for comfort instead of acknowledging that I was her husband, standing right there in front of her. Silence became my answer to everything she sent. Instead of engaging with her attempts to maintain control, I kept walking forward with my life. I started jogging again in the mornings, something I had given up when our marriage started consuming all my mental energy. I cleaned out the garage that I had been avoiding for months, finally tackling projects that had been sitting there, gathering dust. I donated her old books to the library, deleted her carefully curated playlist from my phone, and found a box of photos that I couldn't bring myself to throw out yet. I taped that box shut and carried it up to the attic. Maybe someday I'll burn those pictures. Maybe I won't. But at least they're not sitting in my living room pretending to still matter, pretending to represent something real that we had built together. And the best part of this entire process was discovering that I could actually sleep again. Real, restful sleep that left me feeling refreshed instead of drained. No more pretending not to notice when she slipped out of bed at 2 in the morning to text someone in the bathroom. No more lying next to a stranger who had once promised to be my forever. No more waking up wondering if today would be the day she finally chose to come back to me fully, because I no longer wanted her to. She had become just a chapter in my life, a sharp, painful, unforgettable chapter that taught me things I never wanted to learn. But she was just a chapter, not the ending, not even close to the ending of my story. The divorce papers were ready by the end of the month. Philip sent them over with quiet efficiency. No dramatic emails, no long legal letters explaining the process. Just a clean PDF file titled Final Draft Dissolution Agreement that appeared in my inbox like any other piece of business correspondence. I sat at my kitchen table, my new one, not the old one she had picked out during that phase where she thought she wanted to embrace minimalist living, and read every single line with a highlighter in my hand. The property split was clearly defined, with no ambiguity about who got what. There were no kids involved, so no custody battles to navigate. Assets were divided cleanly down the middle, 50-50, exactly the way it should be. I didn't contest anything in the agreement, didn't try to claim more than my fair share out of spite or anger. I didn't want to drag this process out any longer than necessary. What I wanted was simple. I wanted out. Completely, legally, permanently out. All that remained was her signature on the designated lines. The silence between us had stretched long enough that I assumed she finally understood that we weren't circling back to try again. This wasn't a trial separation, or one of those movie scenarios where someone realizes too late what they had lost and comes crawling back with genuine remorse. This was real, this was legal, and this was permanent. Then she showed up at my house again, unannounced just like before. No warning text, no phone call asking if it was a good time to talk. I heard the familiar knock and looked through the peephole to see her standing there on my doorstep. She looked the same as always. That effortless makeup, that carefully controlled mask covering whatever emotions might be lurking underneath. But something was different this time. She was holding a picture frame in her hands, one that I hadn't seen in quite a while. It was our wedding photo. I opened the door, but made no move to invite her inside. She spoke first, her voice softer and more tentative than it had been during our previous encounters. "I found this in a drawer at my apartment," she said, holding up the frame. "I didn't take it when I moved out, and I thought you might want it back." I just looked at her, waiting to see where this was going. "Why are you here, Jessica?" She hesitated for a moment, shifting her weight from one foot to the other like she was nervous. "I wanted to see if you were really sure about this whole divorce thing." I let out a quiet breath, amazed that she was still operating under the illusion that this was somehow up for debate. "You still think this is some kind of negotiation?" She took a small step forward, not too close but enough to test the boundary I had established. "Ethan, we spent 4 years building a life together," she said, her voice taking on that pleading quality I had heard before. "We've been through so many things as a couple. Maybe I handled this situation all wrong, but maybe I was just scared and lost, and didn't know how to communicate what I was feeling. I don't know." "You do know," I told her firmly. "You just don't like what it says about who you really are as a person." Her eyes flicked down to the wedding frame in her hands. "We were happy once," she said quietly. "We were really, genuinely happy together." "We were," I agreed without hesitation. "But you started writing a completely new story behind my back while pretending to still live in the old one with me. She blinked rapidly, and I could tell she had probably prepared for tears to start flowing at this point. Maybe she had even practiced this conversation in the mirror, rehearsing the right combination of vulnerability and regret that might crack my resolve. "I keep thinking," she said softly, "what if we just tried again? What if we went to counseling together and really worked on our communication issues?" I actually laughed once, not from humor, but from complete disbelief at what I was hearing. "You're not here for reconciliation," I said, seeing right through her performance. "You're here because I didn't chase after you when you left. Because you ran your manipulation game and I didn't play along the way you expected me to. That scares the hell out of you, doesn't it?" Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. She couldn't deny it because we both knew it was true. "You don't love me, Jessica," I said clearly, making sure every word landed with precision. "You miss having control over someone who adored you unconditionally. You miss being able to do whatever the hell you wanted while knowing I would always be there as your safety net. But you don't miss me as a person. You miss the version of me that made you feel safe and secure while you explored your options with other men." She still didn't deny any of it, which told me everything I needed to know. I gestured toward the picture frame in her hands. "Take that with you when you go," I said. "It probably means more to you now than it ever did when we were actually married and building a life together." She hesitated there on my doorstep, clearly not getting the response she had hoped for. So I said the thing that would finally end this conversation, and any lingering hope she might have had about manipulating me back into her life. "You don't get to grieve a fire that you started," I said with finality. She swallowed hard, turned around without another word, and walked away from my house for what I knew would be the last time. I didn't watch her go. I simply closed the door behind her and listened to the sound of real closure clicking into place. The divorce papers came back signed just 2 days later. There was no note attached, no additional comments or attempts to communicate. Just her signature, smooth and distant, like it belonged to someone who had long since detached herself from the mess she had created. I stared at it for a moment, not out of sadness, but out of a sense of finality that felt almost surreal. Then I scanned the document into a PDF file, hit send on the email to Phillips, and just like that, my marriage was officially over. No ceremony, no big dramatic confrontation, no last-minute reconciliation scene. Just silence, a cursor blinking on a computer screen, and a name that I no longer had to share my life with. The closure didn't hit me all at once like some massive wave of relief. It came in small pieces over the course of several days and weeks. The next morning, I made coffee for one person and didn't instinctively check my phone for good morning messages that were never going to come. There was no expectation anymore, no anxiety about who she might be messaging while sitting across from me at breakfast and pretending to scroll through news headlines. I went to work and answered emails normally, without that constant background stress about what might be happening at home. I didn't flinch when coworkers mentioned her name in passing conversation. I even went out for drinks with some friends I hadn't seen since our wedding day, people I had gradually lost touch with during the years when I was so focused on trying to save my marriage. When they asked how I was holding up during this transition, I didn't lie or put on a fake smile to make them feel more comfortable. I told them the honest truth, not the messy dramatic details that would have made for good gossip, but the real version that mattered. "She broke it, and I picked myself up," I said simply. That weekend, I cleared out the very last remnants of her presence from my house. I found one of her old sweaters that had somehow gotten wedged under the bed, a pair of high heels hidden in the back corner of the closet, and a notebook she used to write in that was mostly empty now except for grocery lists and random thoughts. I boxed it all up and dropped it off at her apartment building's front desk with no warning and no message attached. Just closure delivered in cardboard, the final period at the end of a very long, painful sentence. She didn't text me after that final delivery of her belongings. She didn't call to ask how I was doing or try to maintain some kind of friendly contact between us. She didn't attempt to come back again with new strategies or different approaches to win me over. Maybe she had found a new shoulder to cry on, someone else to play the victim for, while she rewrote the story of our marriage to make herself look better. Or maybe she had finally realized that the mirror she had been avoiding for months had followed her into every room of her new life. As for me, I started running again in the mornings, something I had abandoned during the months when our relationship was consuming all of my mental and emotional energy. I picked up the guitar that I hadn't touched in years, the one that had been gathering dust in the corner of our bedroom, while I focused all my attention on trying to save something that was already dead. I reconnected with Ryan on a regular basis, having real conversations instead of the superficial check-ins we had been doing for too long. Most importantly, I started to actually laugh again without feeling like I had to fake it for appearances or social expectations. My house gradually began to feel like home again, not because it was perfect or because I had erased every trace of what had happened, but because it was genuinely mine. Every decision about furniture, about decorations, about how to spend my time was made based on what I actually wanted instead of what might make someone else happy. I don't hate her. I don't sit around hoping that karma will strike her down or that she'll eventually get what's coming to her. I don't want revenge or to see her suffer the way she made me suffer. What I wanted, and what I finally achieved, was peace. That version of love that I had fought so desperately to keep alive, the one where I sacrificed my own self-respect to maintain her comfort, died the night she chose someone else's attention over my loyalty and commitment. But in its place, something else grew. Something quieter but infinitely stronger than what I had lost. I found self-respect again. Something I hadn't even realized I had been missing until it was gone. I learned the difference between loving someone and losing yourself in the process of trying to save them from their own choices. If you're reading this because you've recognized some of the same warning signs in your own relationship, the cold distance, the sudden secrecy, the gaslighting that makes you question your own gut instincts and intuition, let me tell you something that I wish someone had told me months earlier. Trust yourself completely. People who actually love you don't make you feel crazy for asking simple, reasonable questions about their behavior. They don't replace genuine emotional connection with manipulation and lies. And they sure as hell don't sit in someone else's lap at a party and then call it loneliness when they get caught. I thought I had lost someone who was supposed to be my forever, the person I was going to grow old with and build a family with. But what I actually found was something much more valuable than what I had given up. I found myself again. The person I was before I started bending and twisting and compromising myself into shapes that would fit into her version of what a husband should be. The woman I married turned out to be someone who was capable of looking me in the eye and lying without flinching. Someone who could compartmentalize her life so effectively that she could maintain multiple relationships simultaneously while making each person feel like they were the only one who mattered. But I also discovered that I was someone who could survive that kind of betrayal, learn from it, and come out stronger on the other side. This experience taught me that some people will take your love and use it as a weapon against you, convincing you that your devotion is somehow proof of your inadequacy. They'll make you believe that loving them harder will eventually be enough to fill whatever void is driving them to seek validation elsewhere. But the truth is that no amount of love from you can fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed, someone who prefers the excitement of deception to the peace of genuine commitment. I'm not the same person I was when this story started. I'm more careful about who I trust with my heart, more aware of the red flags that I chose to ignore because I was so invested in believing in the best version of someone rather than accepting who they actually were. But I'm also more confident in my own worth, more certain of what I will and won't accept in a relationship, and more capable of walking away when my instincts tell me that something isn't right. The most important lesson I learned through all of this is that you can't love someone into being the person you need them to be. You can't sacrifice your own mental health and self-respect, hoping that eventually they'll appreciate what you've given up for them. And you definitely can't build a real relationship with someone who views your love as a convenience rather than a gift. My marriage ended, but my life didn't. In fact, in many ways, it finally began.